seen it to others. And I think if we applied a little bit of this principle of vicarious experience, we'd realize we don't have to go out and make every single imaginable mistake. We can learn.
I have found many times when I put something on the list that gradually, as I come up scale, I look back on the list, and then I feel like I don't have to do that anymore. I don't have any desire to do it anymore. And I think it's the same with truth. When we honor truth every day in our life, things that we may have a desire to do are erased. And you find yourself looking back and say, why did I even want to do that? But yet if we do it and then we say we have to do it to experience it, you can get tapped into it. And I think you can go off track a lot on a tangent.
This concerns the emotional resistances of plants and animals. How does it come about? Is it etheric or morphogenic?
What's the question?
Well, you said if you can access the emotional body of plants and rocks and animals,
Yes?
you will realize that they have a lot of emotional resistances, just like man has.
Yes?
Now, the thing I'm wondering is, how does theirs come about? Is it like through morphogenic resonance or etheric body type of reaction?
The answer is yes.
Okay, thank you.
And what you're dealing here is with the phenomena that the spirit itself is immortal in its nature, and it operates within certain bounds and limitations, certain parameters of activity which it is bound by, and within the boundaries or limitations of those parameters, that will determine the morphogenetic field which perpetuates that particular condition of that bondage of spirit. Okay?
So here's some more of those interesting concepts. Who said I got? Resistances? What's that, Gary? Okay. Well, good. You can have a talk to John. More resistances. It's like if, let's coming back to this thought, word, thought, feeling, spoken word, or feel, think, act, or any way you want to describe it, but it's like, take fire walking, for example. It's been on every continent on this planet for eons of time, and it's not necessarily this lifetime that we're going to experience fire walking. It might have been in Bali or Polynesia or even Europe. They used to do fire walking. And it's like, to become one with all things, then inevitably we will experience these things in some way or another. And it's like Doug says, you don't have to jump off a 20-story building to find that that's not good for your body. But, can we say that we've never jumped off a cliff in some lifetime and found out the hard way? The real hard way. It's not the fall that hurts, it's the sudden stop at the bottom. Anyway, it's, and so that we can get into this linear thinking, we're saying that something is right or something is wrong, instead of looking at it from the feel, think, act viewpoint, where we include all viewpoints and become one with all things. Because, like, everyone knows, if you tell a child not to go near the stairs, don't go near those stairs, don't do this, don't do that, it's only going to be a matter of time before that child is going to be on the stairs. But it's like, when we see the big picture and don't get involved in right or wrong or black or white, and then we can see all these shades of grey, then I'll speak for myself, then I realise that everything is evolutionary and nothing is involutionary in the long term, in the big picture I'm talking about.
I appreciate your point of view. I will relegate it to the realm of nonsense.
Actually, I did want to say one thing. We were talking a little bit earlier about mental resistance, and I just wanted to give you all a little bit of food for thought. This is kind of a good timing on this one. without going to any details as to what exactly we do in the visualization and consciousness courses, I will say this. We do spend an awful lot of time very carefully examining our mental resistances. And one of the things I want you all to just think about here for a moment as you're going through your triple axes or having just recently been through your triple axes, so it's all very fresh in your mind. If you were about, say, 2 to 3 weeks into a visualization and consciousness course, and John were to walk in one morning and say, okay, folks, we're just going to do cranials today, what do you think the reaction would be? Exactly my point. It would be a sigh of relief. Oh, thank you, John, just cranials. Just excruciating physical pain. Thank you, you're merciful. So just please consider that as you go through your cranials here. Am I exaggerating, John? Not much. I've seen it happen.
That's why I said just a little, because the resistance will still be there.
Yes.
Maybe what I'm going to say isn't quite relevant, I don't know. But something that comforts me from the Bible, I believe it's out of James, is the wisdom that comes from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, easy to be entreated, full of mercy and good fruits, without, well, that wasn't quite the word, or without prejudice. That gives me a great deal of comfort. I'd like to know what you think.
I can't disagree with you. It's a beautiful comment. I do want to get back to the statement that I have heard many people make who have dug big holes for themselves by saying it doesn't matter what you do because all energy is God energy. Those things that take away the consciousness of man which are involutionary, leaving the mind incapable of rational thinking, leaving the mind literally incapable of free agency, leaving the mind totally submerged into reactive mechanisms. These are involutionary in nature. And where one person will be evolutionary in nature, in putting these things from smoking cigarettes to smoking marijuana and so on, putting these things behind them, other people will choose to remain fixated in their bondage to where they cannot think a rational thought because their thoughts will be completely submerged into reaction. So I want to just say again that anybody who takes the position that it's all right in the big picture to involve themselves in involutionary activity, I relegate that type of doctrine to the realm of nonsense because it goes contrary to the teachings of any great master who ever lived. Esther.
I have two things here. One is a question and another one is a what? Anita talked earlier about point holding, about somebody just telling stories about their life. What I notice also is that when they are going on with the stories, if you are attentive, they hit a certain portion of the story where the heat increases. At that time, just draw their attention to that place and let them stay on it. I just thought, let me mention it. Now, talking about resistances, it's a delicate question here. John, can you talk a little about body electronics and finances?
And?
Finances. And finances. Body electronics and economics. Yeah.
I'll talk to you a little later about that. I don't know what you're referring to here, Esther. We'll talk about that a little later, okay? Not now? But we'll talk later and find out what your question really is and see if we get to the bottom of it. I want to say one more thing. When you are literally bound by the emotional body where you cannot think rationally, you do not have the capacity to discern. And when you do not have the capacity to discern, you start promoting false doctrines, which if other people who cannot discern by those doctrines, then all of you go together down the deep end and down into identification with matter, where you cannot discern at all, but you're simply bound by your reactive mechanisms. Discernment can only come at the mental body level, after you have gone through the transmutation of the emotional body level through going through the fire of the Kundalini. And sometimes it takes a great deal of time to realize that after you've gone through the Kundalini fire, you may be able to discern in only one small segment of your life at that time. And it takes a long time before we're able to discern in other areas, because we have to move in such a way to be able to discern in other areas. And so this is something I want to be considered very carefully, is that we think we know and we don't know, because all of us, no matter who we are, at our very best, we see through a glass darkly. And to bring about the position to where we can undo that damage to ourselves, we have to be able to follow laws and principles diligently with commitment and intent, and not yield oneself to be bowed and controlled by reactive mechanisms, which then every time that we allow these reactive mechanisms to bind us, and we go down off the deep end and down into identification with matter, the less capable we are of pulling ourselves out each time we do that. Doug. Okay, Anita.
I just want to say something briefly in answer to Esther's question. I've always said poverty is a state of mind. Has nothing to do with the amount of dollars in your pocket. And if you believe in God, then you will believe in abundance, because He will give you everything that you ask for. And if you have the faith in that and belief in that, and you pray for whatever abundance you need, it will be there for you. I've had this throughout my whole life. I've never doubted it, and I've never had a problem with money. It always just comes to me. So if you pray and you have the faith, you are abundant. You are wealthy. And just maintain that state. I am wealthy. I am abundant.
You have to realize also that Anita has worked hard throughout her entire life, and she has never allowed herself to become dependent upon anybody else for her financial livelihood. She has worked hard with blood, sweat, and tears, and that's the way it's been. And so it's not just believing, you have to put your actions in harmony with your belief. Let's take about it.
Okay. I think I want to say something about what Peter keeps dwelling on, the fact of things that are good and bad. With my work with body electronics, I am practicing at every moment to encompass the dualities where I see things as they are. Granted, there are things in life that are happening every day that there is a point where I do judge it, and I try and catch myself on it. I think some of the people in here know that I've approached them on it, and they know that, well, maybe I don't approve of that or whatever. Garlic? Onions, garlic, and other things. But I think what we're trying to do here is to see things as they are. We're not trying to make a judgment, okay, the firewalk is bad, not eating garlic is good. I'm certainly not going through it like that. I'm trying to encompass everything where I just see it as it is. However, I have the discernment to know that if I read in the I Am book, the ascended masters will not appear before you if you eat garlic and onions, I have the discernment to know that if I do that they will not appear. Now, the discernment is not a judgment on the garlic and onions. Or we can use any topic. I'm just using garlic and onions because that one is so close to me. I mean, you could take this into any issue of your lives. And I think what the mistake here with Peter, well, maybe it's not a mistake, it's a challenge. It's in thinking that we are judging a situation. I am certainly trying the best I can not to judge, but just to recognize a particular event and to discern whether that's going to take me in the evolutionary spiral or the involutionary spiral.
I think one of the abilities that virtually every one of us possesses in abundance is the ability to justify practically any course of action that we want to take. And I think this is a very, very human trait that all of us share. And basically the bottom line is most of us are still quite reactive, maybe 98, 99, maybe a few people that work their way down to 96 or 97, but bottom line, most of what all of us do is programmed. And most of the time, therefore, we're engaged in certain courses of activity that are reactive, that are programming. And I think when we start, as most of us, or really all of us here have done, and when we start studying various spiritual principles, it's very, very easy to take a bit here and a bit there and a part of this and part of that and justify practically anything that we want to do, whether it's firewalking, whether it's masturbation, whether it's drunkenness, whether it's drugs. And this is a real danger. This is a real danger. We are accountable, you could say, you're really ultimately accountable to yourself and to the God within you, not to everyone else so much as to yourself for your own progression. Each one of us is accountable for every thought, every word, every emotion, every action that we take. And every last one of these things has a consequence. When we think a certain thing, it has a consequence. When we feel a certain way about something that we've done or somebody else has done, it has a consequence. When we speak certain words, this has a consequence. When we engage in certain activity, whether it's just once or whether it's repetitively, it has a consequence. And if we take the position that it doesn't matter what we do, that it's okay to make mistakes, it's okay to do things that are involutionary, what we're really doing is we're denying the fact that there's a consequence to what we're doing. We're denying the fact that the actions that we take, the words that we speak, the feelings that we have, and the thoughts that we think, we're denying that these have any meaning or any value. And we're placing ourselves in a position that is less than godliness. If we have any intention whatsoever of ascending or making any progress whatsoever, we have to, as John would say, we have to assume the virtue. And we have to make it our business to behave in accordance with correct principle, to do everything within our power to think, to feel, to speak, and to act in a manner that will be uplifting for ourselves and everyone else. Because to do otherwise is to just relegate ourselves back to being a reactive blob of protoplasm. I mean, that's basically the choice you have. All of us have. We can make the choice on a moment-to-moment basis with commitment and intent to obey whatever level of law we currently have received. And if we can do that, we leave ourselves open to receive higher and higher levels of law and to make progress. In the absence of commitment to obey a law, in the absence of the intent to obey a law, there is no other alternative other than that we're doomed or condemned by our own refusal to obey law to continual re-experience of the reactive content of our own mind. It's really not any more complicated than that. You can choose to move upscale by obeying law. In the absence of that choice, which is itself a choice, you condemn yourself to the involutionary spiral. And it's not a choice that you make just once, it's a choice that you make every moment. And this is where we have the opportunity to be discerning, or if we refuse to do that, well, then we reap the whirlwind. And this is the situation that we're all in here. This idea that idea that's been put forth, that somehow or another all energy is God energy, and that you can do whatever you want, as John has said, this is nonsense. Now, this is certainly not the first time I've encountered this idea in seminars. I'd say it's probably been there in one form or another in practically every instructor seminar I've ever been in, and I think this is about my 18th or 19th set over the years. So I've certainly seen this happen quite a few times. And I spent about 4 or 5 years living out in Maui, Hawaii, which is probably certainly one of the world capitals of the if it feels good, do it kind of way of thinking. And you got all sorts of people out there doing all sorts of things that are destroying themselves. You got people doing ecstasy, you got people doing mushrooms, you got people doing LSD, you got people firewalking, you got people doing every imaginable thing, all in the name of spirituality, all perfectly justified in their own minds, all feeling with all sincerity that they're doing things that are uplifting for themselves. But the bottom line is, just look at the consequences of the actions of these people. Now, I feel that each one of us here is a God in embryo. I feel that each one of us here has within us that spark from our Creator. And therefore, I feel that every last one of us has a lot of responsibility, because everything that we feel, everything that we think, everything that we say, and everything that we do has consequences. So I'm not going to deny the God within myself or the God within any one of you by taking the position that it doesn't matter what you do. It matters a great deal what you do, because there's consequences of everything. And the consequences are such that you're either moving uphill or you're moving downhill. There's not really much of a fence to sit on. You can obey law and move uphill, or you can refuse to do so and you can move downhill. And it's really not any more complicated than that.
Okay, are we ready to go on? Neil.
Yeah, looking back in my experience, I can see where there was a time where I said that everything was of God. But now I can see it clearly that it was appropriate in that situation because I was sort of opening my heart up after having it very, very closed for many, many years. And it helped me just accept what was. Now, it was only a brief period of time before I needed to become very yang and say, okay, I accept. Now I've got to start the road to putting things right. But it was a very vital point that it was very appropriate just for a short time.
Okay. We have some other material we have to go through. I hope we've sorted through these little niggles here that need to be sorted through. As instructors, put yourself in the position of Doug, myself, and Anita. Put yourself in the position and think of how you are going to handle questions of this type when you are confronted with them during a seminar. You have a responsibility of standing on correct principle. And you teach people correct principle and allow them the privilege of governing themselves accordingly. And that you must keep in mind. We're on the pancreas level. And on your notes, on your notes, I want you to put down basically the following information as we cover it. I think that you'll find a lot of this quite interesting. What took place in Indiana, in the States, was a young lady came in with where she was terribly diabetic. And even though she was diabetic, there was a continual swing in blood sugar. But she was considered and diagnosed to be diabetic. And there were times would be when she'd get into a hypoglycemia, and she'd be literally off the wall emotionally, and what they would call almost a manic depressive state. So, bottom line, we put her on the program, and we held points. We worked on the pancreas points because of her diabetic condition. There was absolutely no change. We had no progress whatsoever. Nothing worked. At that time, you begin to look over carefully the person's physical structures, the body, and you begin to look at different injuries to the muscle structures, which one will find on the body. And the first one I want to present to you will be the latissimus dorsi. This on? Pull that out. Doug?
The latissimus dorsi will be a muscle. Again, remember, these muscles on the left side are the ones on top, and these over on the right are the deeper muscles. So the latissimus dorsi is right here. It attaches down along the lower spine and comes up in this area, right here.
Okay. Now, in your notes, this particular muscle structure is directly related to the pancreas. This young lady, as a child of about 3 years old, went to stay with her grandmother, who had one of these metal stoves that sat in the center of the kitchen that they used for heating. And the little girl, while she was at her grandmother's, backed up against this red-hot stove that had no guard on it, and she burnt herself very deeply in this area of the latissimus dorsi. And she had a very large scar in this particular part of her body. And so I thought to myself, okay, latissimus dorsi related directly to the pancreas. Let's see what we can do on that area. And so we had to work along the spine to get the nerve supply restored into the latissimus dorsi. We had to work carefully on the latissimus dorsi in the area of the scar. And suddenly the entire room was full of kerosene. And then this lady had a memory of being a little girl where grandmother used kerosene for everything. And the grandmother, when she burned herself on this freestanding wood stove, when she burnt herself, the grandmother simply put kerosene on the burn, as she did everything else. Every injury, everything that you can possibly imagine. Now, what is kerosene? It's a hydrocarbon. It's a byproduct of the petroleum industry. And anything which is a byproduct of the petroleum industry everything from Vaseline to any type of your petrochemicals, will have a suppressive effect upon whatever's going on in the body. Now, while we're holding that point, she went back and re-experienced the grandmother putting the Vaseline on this scar tissue. As the scar tissue gradually disappeared, by her re-experiencing the burning, searing pain in that particular scarred area. When it was complete, it took about a half an hour for the kerosene fumes to be dispelled from that scar that were held there for maybe more than 20 to 30 years. Now, when that was complete, her latissimus dorsi in that area where she got burned severely healed, and her diabetic condition instantly went away. No hypoglycemia, no manic depressive states, and no diabetes. And this is wherein a muscle structure on the body, will have a definite relationship to different organs and glands, endocrine glands and so on. And this is where my first situation was, where I found a muscle structure directly related to a pathological condition where the person's life oftentimes was in danger from the wide swings of blood sugar brought about by this condition. Now, since that time, I began working and looking at other muscle structures, and we find that there is another muscle structure called the triceps. Now, do you all know where the triceps is? Okay, the triceps is on the back of the arm here. Doug, would you go through that, please?
Well, it's just on your upper arm. It's the muscle on the back. It's the muscle that would extend your arm like that. So if you're doing push-ups or press-ups or whatever, that's the muscle you use. It's or one muscle, but it's simply the muscle that extends the arm, and this is it right here.
Okay, now that triceps will also be tied into the pancreas. So if there's an injury to that triceps muscle, then we have to get the nerve supply back into that, get the circulation back into it, and start exercising that to build that particular muscle up, that the pancreas might be enhanced in its normal function. And this is one thing that I would like to point the way very emphatically for you. It'll take hours for you to learn this material, but learn to take each muscle and learn which exercise mechanism will help to build that particular muscle, and find out from the material that we're having printed up for you that will be passed out to you. Okay? I think that's down in Atherton today. This will be passed out to you, so you'll have a guide that Doug has put together here on the material that we have been presenting in our advanced procedures, that you might understand the muscles and what organs they are related to. Now let's take a very close look at theory here, which will take you many, many hours of study. I would first recommend getting a book like Gray's Anatomy. There are several good books on anatomy that you can get. I would like you to carefully consider that when you study the muscle structures, you first of all determine the fixed end of a muscle, which will be called the origin of that muscle structure. And then secondly, that you consider the end which is fixed to a mobile position, like a bone that moves type of thing, which will be called the insertion. So the origin and the insertion will both have prominent features to play in the mind-body concept that we'll go into now at this time. If the origin is fixed, and the insertion is in general mobile, then which one would be yin and which would be yang? Eh? Say that again. The origin would be where the muscle originates. So that would be the yang or yang position. The insertion, which is mobilized, would be the outer reflection of the yang, which would be then your yin. And so when you take a look at the muscle structures, you will find that some people will have trouble with the origin of the muscles, and other people will have trouble with the insertions of the muscles, depending upon the resistances that they have in the various emotional patterns that they would have. Okay, and this would affect it. Now let me ask you a question. If you're dealing with the pancreas, for example, how could you have a yin outer manifestation of thought which would affect the pancreas, or how would you have an inner essence of yang affecting the pancreas, which would be the creative aspect of it? I want you to think about this for a moment. Now remember, your yang will be associated with your creative aspect. Your yin will be associated with the outer manifestation of that creative act. So when you're dealing with the emotions and so on, give me an example on how the yin and the yang aspect of the muscle structure would be affecting the pancreas. Come on, Lil.
Is it that the pancreas being related to grief, the yang aspect, I had it, what am I trying to say? The yang aspect is where it's fixed so that they're not going to express their grief readily, and the yin...
Let's stop at that. If they're not expressing their grief or they're suppressing it, then what would be affected?
That muscle.
Okay, which part of it?
The origin of it.
The origin, because you're not expressing that aspect of it, okay?
It's being held on to.
Okay, and then what would the yin aspect then refer to?
Well, it would relate to where the muscle, the insertion of the muscle. Would it be an overexpression of emotion, over-emotionality?
It would be where the person can't control the outer expression of their grief. And the grief is just going on and on and on and on and on and on for months in some cases. Now, one will be the yin aspect, one will be the yang aspect, and this would be correct, Lel, what you have observed. Doug.
It would seem then that as a person went through different levels of healing crisis and different layers or their patterns, then that they're really going to have the pain in the muscles is going to move around quite a bit, because it's not just, it's going to move around from muscle to muscle depending on where you're at in the scale of emotions, but even within a given muscle it seems like it's going to go from, from one aspect of the muscle to the other.
Okay, now let's look at this first. In order to resolve a problem with suppressed emotionality, what must we experience first?
Well, you have to experience the emotion before you can get over it.
Which part of it?
I would think that you'd start with the origin, where you would have to first become aware of the emotion, and then you would sort of move out to the insertion as you went through the expression of it, and then probably you'd get to a certain point where you were really getting both and the whole muscle would hurt.
Okay, now let's look at it the other way. The outer expression is the reflection of the inner essence, right? And if we use the body, which is the outer reflection, the physical body, as the doorway to spirituality, what must we then experience first before we can get to the inner essence?
The outer.
Which would be the
insertion.
The yin, which would be the
The insertion.
The insertion, and then move from the insertion then up through and to the origin.
Wouldn't there be a point, though, at which one experiences oneself as cause and effect simultaneously, and you'd have the entire muscle, you'd be experiencing pain in both ends?
Would there?
I think so.
When?
Well, it seems like you have to experience, the cause precedes the effect. So in a healing crisis, the effect is re-experienced.
First.
Then the cause is re-experienced.
Right.
But then there's also a third point when you're hitting the mental body where you experience cause and effect simultaneously.
And what would you be able to experience then?
Pain all over.
Which would be the Kundalini burn.
Yeah.
And then you would have the entire body would then come to the support of a healing crisis in one part of the body. And you'd have your exothermic reaction. Now, the endothermic reaction, when you study Book 3, you'll find the wave theory on the charts. And you'll find your yin and yang aspect. Write this down so you can look at it. You'll forget about it otherwise. Study Book 3 carefully, Book 2 also, and look at the wave activity of the yin and the yang. Now, you'll find in some cases where your grief is an outflow, just like your fear will be an inflow. I don't want to draw this. I want you to study it on your own. The grief will be an outflow. You're crying, you're letting go. But your fear is running away, where it's a withdrawal. It's an inflow. And you'll find that each time that you have your cause-effect relationship here, it's going to vary like the sine wave, where one will be an inflow, one will be an outflow, one will be an inflow, and one will be the outflow. And you'll find that this will also be true in your yin-yang relationship to that, because like on your fear, you'll first of all have to be willing to be the effect before you can be cause, and likewise, but the willingness to be the effect then at this time is where you must be willing to be totally withdrawn from the situation, where you have run from it, which is the outer effect, before you can come up to where you are experiencing literally the emotion of withdrawal from a situation. You see, you're going from the crystallization end of it, of fear, to the emotional end of it, where everything is mobilized into a withdrawal, into what you call, at the hyperactivity of fear, you'll have sheer terror. And so you'll have to look at that carefully. And so when you're working on the muscle structures, which are tied into the emotion of fear, which is tied into what organ? Thymus and heart area. Okay, when you're dealing with those particular areas, suddenly you get into just absolutely stark raving fear or terror, and when you're working with the muscle structures. Now, if you're working with the muscle structures now, and you can identify the outer manifestation beginning with the insertion and the origin, which would have to do with the inner essence, when you're moving in a pattern of motion, you're going to be moving from the insertion to the origin. Now, this is what we'll get into, what we call moving point holding, after we have mastered cranial work. Because moving point holding will not work on an individual if they're incapable of enduring the pain properly, or if they haven't got their head together emotionally to where they can recognize the yin and yang aspects of the emotional thing that they're getting through. This is where we get into quite an observable thing, where we understand what's happening in our body. Now, on your notes, all of you have some understanding of massage therapy, and some of you are very deep into massage therapy. Everybody knows that you don't start doing a lot of massage work in areas of varicose veins. Everyone knows that you don't move in reverse order to the normal flow of the lymph. And so therefore, basically, there are exceptions, but basically you're moving toward the heart in all massage activity, or else you create conditions where you strip the valve structures in what you call the lymphatic system by going contrary to that, where you go from the head down to the feet. Now, I have seen some people doing very deep tissue massage where they go from the head to the feet. This is terribly, terribly irresponsible because it strips the valve system in the lymphatics and creates conditions downstream where the body just will not function. Likewise, you will know that the arterial structures of the blood system will be in deeper than the venous system. And the arteries go from the heart out, and then the venous system comes back. Now, if you go contrary, or shall we say away from the heart, you will also cause a stripping of the valve system in the venous system, causing what we will call a venous pooling, P-O-O-L-I-N-G. It's a pooling of the blood, and which will cause more of a problem with varicose veins because you've stripped out, by massaging the wrong direction, you have stripped out the valve structures in the venous system. And so when you massage, and I think you are all intelligent enough to realize this, you do not massage away from the heart. You massage gently toward the heart, gently, so you don't strip out the venous valve structures in the venous system, and you don't strip out the lymphatic valve system in the lymphatic system. Is this clear? Are you with me on this, everybody? Okay. I'm sure you can all get the picture in your mind as to which way the lymphatics are moving. They move toward the heart, and the venous system moves toward the heart. And the same thing is true with your deep tissue massage, and here, wherein if you have not had the point holding to establish the nerve supply and circulation into the body, if you haven't done that, then you're oftentimes operating in a numb area with your deep tissue massage, and you're doing the person irreparable harm because they don't feel pain, and you can be doing a lot of damage to the tissues that a person does not know is happening. So therefore, your own individual responsibility, you don't allow people to harm your body by massaging the wrong directions or by doing deep rolfing or deep tissue massage. Now, this behooves you to learn, for example, the different muscle structures in the back and the front of the body, so you can see which way they lay. Now, I'd like Doug to show you, for example, the problems that we would have with the trapezius, the rhomboideus muscle, and then the very deep back muscles, which would be going literally from the cranium all the way down to the sacrum.
Okay, you've got your...
I want you to go into the fiber structures, Doug, on this very carefully. And because we'll be getting into this next week, we'll be getting into the techniques we will use to open these muscles up so that we can do a proper manipulation on it. Go ahead, Doug.
You get in along the spine, particularly up in this area of the thoracic spine, but really the entire spine, and you've got an enormous number of different layers of muscles there to deal with. And if you're trying to be fairly specific on what muscle you're working on, like for example, if you're trying to work on the rhomboids here, you have to understand what muscle structures you have to get through in order to get there. And one of the things that you have to get pretty good at if you're really going to be on a muscle is being able to feel the muscle fibers and which direction the muscle fibers run. because that's going to be one of your best clues as to whether you're really, for example, on the rhomboids there. If you want to, for example, you see the trapezius muscle right here in this portion, you'll see that the fibers are basically running in this direction. So, of course, if we were over on the right side of the body, the trapezius fibers are going to be running about like this, about in that direction, which means they're going to be running pretty much at right angles to the rhomboids.
Stop right there. Look at the axial formations here as we go down through the muscle structures. Look at the axis of the fiber structures. And then take a look at the triple axis concept within the muscle structures themselves. Now, let's give a little example of this just for one moment. Who was it the other day that had their elbow, Lil, had her elbow right in that rhomboideus area, Doug, point to it, right in there, and she had that there for about 10 hours, if I recall. 15 hours? Okay, 15 hours of continual pain, where Lil, I think, was stretched right to the limit on the pain that she was going through, just coming out of this one spot. I believe it was on Tessa, wasn't it? Tessa, was on you. How does that back feel right now? Still sore. Does it feel a little more free? It feels free. But here is the muscle structures, Doug. And if you take a look at the muscle structures, we have really a triple axis activity here of 3 different directions where these points become absolutely valid in body electronics, which we don't really put forth on the charts for the very reason it takes so long to get through them. Go ahead, sir.
Well, basically, if you're pressing in this area of the back, there's going to be at least 3 major muscle structures that you're going to be working on, and the fibers are going to be going in 3 different directions because you're going to have the trapezius going about like this, which will be on top. Then you're going to have the rhomboids going in this direction, which will be roughly 90 degrees to the trapezius. And then actually, if you get underneath the rhomboids, you got the sacrospinalis, which is going up and down like that. So you're going to have 3 different muscle structures there. You've actually got some deeper ones than that, but you've got 3 major muscle structures that you're going to be dealing with right in that area.
So how do we handle this properly before we get into moving point holding on those muscles? What must we do first before we get into the release of the trapped, shall we say, the trapped emotionality which is locked in there?
Well, we got to learn where the muscles are and how to find them.
Okay, now we've found the muscles. We know how to find them. Do we do a lot of massage work on those first? Or do we do what Lil did on those points and just held that with her elbow?
Well, from my experience, you'll get a lot more results holding still on a point and going through it no matter how long it takes.
Okay, the gastrocnemius will be the part nearest the skin, and under the gastrocnemius, closer to the bone, is the soleus muscle. Now, both of these particular muscles, one on top of the other, will form right down here and come together at the Achilles tendon. Now, I personally believe, and it's just a belief, but the Achilles tendon is one of the most important parts which ties in the adrenal and the gastrocnemius muscle. And this is one area that can be worked on favorably for everyone. It's spoken of in the ancient literature, where you're all familiar with what they call Achilles and the Achilles tendon and so on. And this Greek literature there, I believe that that has deeper meaning than meets the eye. But because we have found that this Achilles tendon goes down over the heel and then up the back of the leg, and this is one of the major tendons of the body to give support to the entire walking mechanism. And it will be tied in directly to the pancreas and to the adrenal gland, as Doug has pointed out here. Doug, anything more there you want to go into? Okay, Anita? Over.
So just three pancreas reflexes on the front of the body. You've got your sartorius muscle right here. S-A-R-T-O-R-I-U-S, your sartorius muscle, which if memory serves me right, I think is the longest muscle in the body. Your sartorius muscle comes all the way down from up here by the hip, all the way down, kind of crosses over the front of your leg and attaches down here below the knee. So your sartorius. Your abdominal muscles will be a pancreas reflex. The abdominal muscles right here. And then your the clavicular portion of your pectorals. Your major pectoral muscle is in two portions, your sternal and clavicular portion, and it's the clavicular portion right up here, the PMC or pectoralis major clavicular, it's a reflex to a lot of things, but one of them is going to be the pancreas right up here.
Which is the source of the pain that we oftentimes have with your triple axis clavicle.
These muscles, your pectoral muscles, reflex to a lot of different organs and glands, as do many of your other muscles. But on the front of the body, at any rate, your PMC, your abdominals, and your sartorius are your pancreas reflexes there.
Any question there? I'd like to go back to one point, if I may. Back to the triceps. You will find people who have had an injury, in a car injury, they'll have an injury to their triceps, and immediately their pancreas will be affected to where their digestion will be completely devastated. And this particular muscle structure right here, the triceps, will tie into the normal function of the pancreas. But it will affect not only the insulin aspect, it'll also affect the enzyme aspect from the pancreas. So I want to bring that to your attention. Now, any questions here before we go on?
My question is, can one muscle reflex more organs or glands at the same time?
Yes.
Definitely yes. No question about that. And this is where injuries to the body under the onslaught, shall we say, of body electronics will help to correct these muscle structures that have given us some very serious problems. Now, if you've been in a car wreck or something where the muscles have been destroyed in their function and they go atrophied on you, then the whole body begins to shut down. You need to go back and really have the nerve supply and circulation put back into that area, okay? And then have those muscle structures built back up by the proper exercise. David?
John, have you, in your experience, found any one or two or three of these muscles to have more effect than any others on the pancreas?
Good question, David. Let me think for a moment. The muscle which would appear to have the greatest effect would depend quite a bit upon the individual situation, because I can see where the latissimus dorsi has been of great effect on many people who have pancreatic problems because their lower back is always sore. They always want that lower back massage. They just can't get enough lower back massage. I have found people where they have lost their ability to use the tricep muscle, bringing it down and moving the arm back up again, which is the typical tricep movement. I have seen them lose that ability when their pancreas has gone haywire. And so that's a very important muscle structure. I have seen one of the things that we will be using on everybody after cranial is complete and so on will be on the gastrocnemius muscle, which we have found to reconstruct oftentimes with the point holding. And when that calf muscle reconstructs, we find that the pancreas is pretty well settled out and the person loses their various, I'm not going to use the word manic depressive, but I'll just say their emotional swings, which are very common to your hypoglycemia, and will also help out in diabetic conditions. I don't think I can say that one muscle will have priority over another muscle, David. I just don't think I can do that because it's an individual thing that we have to kind of ferret out. Doug, what's your opinion on that? Because we're dealing with opinions here now.
I've seen a lot of variation there. One of the things that I've done in classes is I've had people, you get the chart that'll be passed out where you see all the different muscles that will reflex to a certain organ and gland, and then you also see all the different organs and glands that'll be from the same muscle. And what I've encouraged people to do is this. On the one hand, you look at all the lists you have, like you look at the lists of like let's say you get your eyes read and you pick out 6 or 7 different organs and glands that might be fairly significant for you based on your iris. Then you make a list of, say you have thyroid, pituitary, kidneys, adrenals, whatever. You make a list after each one of those of muscles that are reflex to that organ or gland. Then you maybe look at your teeth and you see where you have problems with the teeth, and you make another list for each tooth with which organs and glands are reflex to those, and then from that you can get more muscles, and you start cross-referencing it. And you might find, for example, that you've got say 6 organ or glandular weaknesses that you've identified through iridology, and you might look at your different lists of muscles, and you might find that you've got one muscle that's a reflex to 5 out of those 6 organs or glands. So that muscle might be very, very significant to you. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, let's say you've picked thyroid, adrenals, kidneys, liver, heart, and lungs, just for the sake of argument, and you come up with all these different lists of muscles for each one of those organs and glands, and then you look and you see which muscles are showing up in several areas, and guaranteed you'll have at least a couple muscles that are showing up, maybe 3 or 4 out of those 6 times. And to me, those are the ones that would be very, very good for a person to work on. Now you go the other extreme, you get somebody to poke you and prod you all over, and you find out where your sorest muscles are. And you isolate down to a few muscles that are really, really painful on you. And then you go the other way. You make a list, well, what are the organs and glands that are reflex from those muscles? And you'll probably find that there'll be certain organs and glands that will show up, after most of the muscles that you've picked out. Do you see what I'm saying here? So it's like you can go in both directions, and as John as said earlier, it will be a very individual thing. One of you might really need to work on the piriformis muscle, somebody else on the pectorals, somebody else on the gastrocnemius. It's going to really vary from one person to the next.
Dear, in sport, I never had a history of cramping. It wasn't something that I experienced. But since body electronics, in both calf muscles, I've had extreme cramping. Sometimes they'll come and you keep perfectly still, and then within 2 minutes it'll happen again. Severe cramping. The last time I felt down, it was just like a matchbox in the lower part. It was actually square, just as though there was a matchbox in there, like a lump of steel. And I don't really understand the reflex muscle to the pancreas and why it would cramp so. I wonder if you could help us there. Might be anything.
I don't have an answer for that because we just, if I were to say that this is what it would be, I'd probably be wrong.
Well, I haven't formed an opinion on it.
I don't know.
Other than it's extremely painful. It's more painful than anything in point holding or anything else.
Thank you very much, sir.
Like the tears flow, you just lie there and keep still
and go for it.
It's the limit, yeah.
Yeah. Very good. We have the wild man from Borneo here with us. We'd like to introduce to you, this is Mel Lynn, I think. This is Mel Lynn, who was here last year, and he has a clinic down in Cairns. Mel, would you like to say a few words while you're here just before lunch? We're just about ready for break.
Yes, I would. Thank you, John. Gee, look, I like your mustache and beard. This way. Oh, okay. Hello.
What's the matter with my shirt? You like my mustache and beard? What's the matter with my shirt?
It all goes together. What I'd like to share with you, from my own experience, dealing with the pancreas, sorry about that, is that the pancreas can be totally supported by the adrenals. And a simple demonstration will show you exactly what happens when a person's pancreas are not working right, therefore not producing enough enzymes, and you've got hypoglycemic problems. One of the simple ways of bringing the pancreas up, the energy of the pancreas up, is by energizing the adrenals. And this can be done by yourself, that is for yourself. And if John will allow me, I'll be happy to give a demonstration of exactly what happens when you do this. As you well know, of course, everything is related, and the thymus has an enormous amount to do with this also, but particularly the adrenals. May I give a demonstration?
You sure can, Mel.
I need a volunteer. Anybody, just come up. We got one here. I work as an applied biokinesiologist, nutritionist, iridologist, neurocellular repatterner. I get rid of herpes, chronic fatigue syndrome, hepatitis, all parasites, and all fungus in one session. And I have letters to prove it. The first thing I'm going to do is see if this man is in balance, and then we'll take it from there. Hold your arm up nice and tight. Command this hold, lock this muscle, hold. Okay, this fellow's in balance. I'm going to check his pancreas. Pancreas, and hold. Is there anybody here who knows their pancreas isn't working? Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much. I'm going to check you for balance. You take your watch off, please. The reason I'm having this gentleman take his watch off, what's your name? Sama. Is because the watch will interfere with his body energy. This body's in balance and hold. Good. Pancreas and hold. Yeah, now here's a typical example of a man who has a pancreas problem.
Speak up, Mel.
A man who has a pancreas problem. I'll get used to this. Give me time. And what I'm going to do is balance up his adrenals, and his pancreas will come into balance and will be strong. Now you noticed when I just did this, checked his pancreas, he couldn't hold his arm up because, as you may or may not know, the body is incapable of telling a lie. The mouth isn't, but the body is. So here we are, pancreas and hold. Now, what I'm going to do is rub up on his adrenals, and you'll see the difference. Everybody likes this. Okay. Pancreas, and hold. You see what happens? Now, and his adrenals will also be balanced, and hold. What I should have done, and will do for you now, is show you that his adrenals were also imbalanced. I'm going to regress his body back a half an hour. His body will regress itself 30 minutes, and hold. Hold tight, hold. Adrenals, hold. And pancreas, hold. They're both out of balance. Stop fighting. You're going to break your arm. Okay, bring this body back to present time and hold. Okay, adrenals, hold. Pancreas, hold. So this is a very simple thing you can do for yourself. What you do is you put your hands back here where you would normally expect your kidneys to be, because the adrenals are little caps, as you know, right on top of the adrenals. And with the back of your hands, and it's particularly good to do this while you're in the shower because you're wet and it's easier, you rub up only, up, 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 on both sides, of course. And your adrenals and pancreas will immediately go into balance.
How long will that hold, Mel?
That will really hold. Well, let's find out. I've just balanced this gentleman's pancreas and adrenals. Will this hold 1 day and hold? Will it hold 1 week and hold? Will it hold 1 month and hold? Will it hold 3 months and hold? Well, there you are, 3 months. I would wager it would go a lot longer than that. But it's very good nevertheless, because what I'm suggesting or finding out from this body is at this time, his adrenals and pancreas will stay in total balance. However, something may happen tomorrow or tonight or the next day that will throw his adrenals out. That is, he may get frightened to death for some reason or another. He sees a snake, who knows? And his adrenals will go out and his pancreas will go out with it. So it is very good to rub your adrenals on a daily basis. And I thank you very much.
Mel, thank you very much for being here. You're invited for lunch. And, okay, we're going to get into some nitty-gritty unpleasantries at this point of time. Because all of us, we want to do the best job that's possible. I don't question that a bit. But once again, because of the nature of things, we think we know, and we end up not knowing, making mistakes that cost a lot of time and sometimes take away from the effectiveness of a good cranial. There were a number of people who are in the following boat. I don't have to name you because I have already corrected you in these areas. And I can feel the heartache sometimes when I correct you in an area, but I have to correct you in the area because this is an instructor's course. And so when I do correct you on a positioning of the finger, oftentimes when that finger is clear off base, all of a sudden you realize that you spent several hours incorrectly doing a cranial. The heartache is there because you want to do it right, and I acknowledge that. Now, I want to stress again, can you hand me Yorick there? Okay. On dealing with the cranial, maybe I can do it here more satisfactorily. I have tried to make it imperative that you understand that when you go into the cranial, you go in above the teeth line. And you are working on the mucous membrane above the alveolar arch. Now, what is happening to a number of you is you end up working over here and going off of the plate, where instead of the finger being up under the eyeball, you're clear off over here on the side where the finger ends up clear out over in this area rather than up under on the plate. Now, I have mentioned to you that the finger will go numb, which it does in most cases, and you cannot even feel where the finger is. But you can watch where your finger is. And you can feel where your finger is, and you're going to have to use some common sense regarding this, because oftentimes when your finger goes numb, you just absolutely shut down your reasoning ability, and you sit there more concerned with a numb finger or a burning finger or getting electrical shock out of the points that are there, and your thinking just shuts completely down, and you don't even know where the finger is. Okay? But you can see where the finger is. If the finger is numb, you will not feel where your finger is on the plate. Now, as instructors, you have to teach, when you're teaching cranial work, you must teach this to the people that you're working with. And you have to be careful with them, because people are going to be doing the best they can, but they're still going to screw up because they're divinely human. Okay? Now, that's the way it is. Because time after time yesterday, we had people where you'd look in the mouth, but the finger would be clear off over to the side, off of the plate. But they couldn't feel the tip of the finger on anything solid because they couldn't feel anything. You with me on that? This is where we have to have patience for each other. Now, here is where, when we find that the finger is off the plate, off to the side, we pull it out gently, making sure that all of the movable parts are all well lubricated, okay, so we don't tear the mucous membrane. We pull the finger out, and then we go back in and go onto the plate where you can feel the tissue that is different from the tissue on the, as you slide it along the gum line, you then run into an area where there is a tension of tissue where you may not feel the plate because the muscular spasm will cover the plate. And even though you work on that whole area, you may never feel the plate, but you will have knowledge as to where the plate is by the muscular spasm which is on the plate. And then when that muscular spasm releases, then you can feel the hardness underneath that muscular spasm. Now, this is going to be one of the hardest things for you to do so that you don't make any mistakes, so you don't spend 2 or 3 hours sitting there with a numb finger burning away with no real productive activity on that triple axis, because we want to have that triple axis well indicated. Now, if you have any questions on this, we're not going to get into the triple axis anymore today, but when Monday comes, we're going to spend some time on finishing up the last residual triple axis that we have to get after. And there are a number of fine points that we're going to go into. I don't want you to be offended as to what I say, but remember what I'm saying, and as instructors now, rise above the student status and think of what you're going to be telling to your students when you get into cranial work. Okay? You're going to have to be careful on one area. Now, Doug and I, we've discussed this, and it anything you want to say, sir?
Yeah, my observation with people holding a triple axis is that a lot of people, when they're holding one, especially if they haven't done it before, very easily slip into a state of confusion where they don't feel like they know where they are. And
which is a word pattern.
Which is a word pattern,
I don't know what I'm doing.
And one of the things that I've observed is this. Most people are still very, very linear in their thinking at best. And so when you ask them where they are, the only thing they're really paying attention to most of the time is where the tip of the finger is. And the thing is, holding a triple axis cranial point is not like holding, say, a point on the foot where you're primarily going to be concerned with a spot, like are you on the right spot, and are you then also at the right angle. It's going to be a lot more complicated than that, because you have to be aware not just where the tip of your finger is, but you have to be aware of where two other surfaces are. You have to be aware of where the fingertip is, You have to be aware of where this edge of the finger is, the part that's supposed to be pressing against the zygomatic arch of the maxilla. And then you have to be aware of where the pad is and how far along that is on the back part of the maxilla. And then you've still got a fourth surface to be aware of, which is the fingernail side. And you have to be aware of where that is with respect to the cornoid process. And I find that I'll come over to tables and ask people where they're at. They won't have any idea where they're at. And I'll just ask them some simple questions. I'll say, well, where's the zygomatic arch along the top of your finger? And they'll have to think about it for 3 or 4 minutes because they really have no idea because they're not paying attention or their finger's numb. And then I'll ask, well, where's the jawbone? Where's that on your on your fingernail side? Where do you feel it? And they'll say, well, I don't know where the jawbone is. I can't feel the jawbone. Well, the thing about it is you should at all times during the process, you should know exactly where the zygomatic arch is along this edge of your finger. You should always know exactly where that is. You should know exactly where the cornoid process is along the fingernail side. If you know those two things, you pretty well can figure out exactly where the finger is. You got to pay attention to more than just the fingertip, or you're just going to get stuck in that state of confusion, and you have to start looking at some of these other factors. It's really not that difficult. It's more our own state of mind as we buy into those doubts and uncertainties. If you just look at a few very, very basic things, it's no problem to figure out where your finger is.
Okay, Brooke, you're 25 minutes late. Now, I'm going to make this point here clear again. I want everyone here on time. Now, would you take the time, Brooke, and can get the notes from some of the other people and make sure that you have it down? Because I have made this statement to the people who were here about 5 minutes after 9. About 3 minutes after 9, I made the statement on the necessity of being on time to your classes. Because there's a lot of material that we're covering here, and when you miss certain basic pertinent material and you're out doing something else, no matter how justified, first priority, you're here for this class, and I want nothing interfering with your being here on time doing what you should be doing, and that's learning this material, which is absolutely necessary to conduct classes properly. And I'm getting impatient on this area. And when I get impatient on something, watch out. And it's because I made very kind statements before, and some people are so mamby-pamby that they can't ever be anywhere on time. And I want you to get here, put everything else aside of every nature, and tell other people in your life that your responsibility is to class and not necessarily to anything else going on. You've got to do it. And I mean that with everybody here. We have other people coming in 20, 25 minutes late. And we've been having that on a regular basis, and I'm tired of that. I've been trying to be patient with this aspect of time, being on time. And if you, as an instructor, cannot be on time as a student, how can you expect your students to be on time when you're conducting a class? Now, let's be reasonable on that. I think Doug and I have been on time every single day that I've been able to walk. You know, you have other situations that interfere, and those things do happen. Will happen to you. But on your students as instructors, insist on being on time to the best of your ability. We've tried to be patient, and every day it gets a little longer, a little longer. People come in a little later and a little later, and we forget the element of time. So please be on time, okay? Now, that is said. I have my little checklist here for little things that need to be tidied up. Next, Doug and I have discussed this matter over several times, and over the years of conducting classes, I have found it very, very difficult to have partners like mates or even close friends working together in cranial work or even on point holding. And I know some people, because of their chemistry between them, they want to work together. And I have found that, and I see it here, I find it that when you have somebody impersonal, they can continue holding a point, and in their empathy, rather than getting personally involved in sympathy and feeling sorry for a person, I see too much taking fingers out. I see too much giving in to and feeling sorry for another person's pain, rather than encouraging them to stay with it and go through the pain rather than being wimpy about it. Now, granted, there are many of us, and I'm talking about myself, who have come up through the ranks on having a fear of pain and feeling very wimpy about pain, where I didn't care for the pain. I didn't like the pain, so I know how that feels. But I know what we have to do is we have to stay with it until we can get through the pain, and you're not doing a person a favor by giving them what we call a breather. You understand me? And this is wherein, Doug, you're handling the program sheets here on the different people. I don't want any partners together, okay, on point holding, because it simply doesn't work. We get in sympathy with our partners. We start letting up on the pressure rather than putting them right to the limit of what they can handle properly, lovingly and willingly, mind you, and we don't give them the opportunity of working through the pain, and so the triple axis becomes 3 or 4 days in a row. The cranial, even the mastoid process is 2 or 3 days in a row, and we don't get through it because we're always letting up on the pressure to give the person a breather so they don't go through the pain because the pain is too much, the pain is too much, the pain is too much. You got me? Okay, here's where you have to use what we call hard love. And you have to be firm, gentle but firm and unyielding, and get the person to the point where they can't stand it anymore. And then once they have reached the point, Rex, come up here, please. I think you're the one that mentioned this to me the other day, your observation. And maybe you could explain it in words that would be better comprehended than what I would use. But what has been your experience about the pain from your own personal experience and observation?
It hurts. My experience is that you've just got to keep driving at it. At the moment, with the arch, I'm just reliving dental extractions, and I've had heaps of them and lots of work. And what I'm discovering is that I pumped that much adrenaline that they had to use heaps and heaps of Novocaine or whatever they were using to actually be able to do the job. And now those things are coming up one after another. Now, at the moment I'm choking, all sorts of things, and I've just about bitten my partner's finger off a couple of times. That's all I can do, because all I ever wanted to do was get the dentist to put his finger in my mouth, and I was going to latch onto it if I got half a chance. And so I'm re-experiencing that with great enthusiasm at the moment. So I have nothing but sympathy for my point holder. The feeling is this: I focus very hard on Saint Germain's divine light, because to me, you've just got to keep driving at it and drive and drive and drive. And the interesting thing is, when we were doing the triple axis, if I focused on my finger and had the person that we were working with doing the same thing, it seemed to go like a hot knife through butter. But as long as the resistance was there, it stopped. Everything stopped. Everything stuck, and it just became intolerable. So I'd just like to, if you can pray, and you do need to focus on that prayer, but it'll happen. It just happens, and it just relaxes. Everything goes, So that's the best way I can describe it.
But what happens the moment that you just allow the pain to flow?
Yeah.
You told me, just all of a sudden, what happens?
Well, there was like how can I describe it? Yeah. It builds up to crescendo. There's like a vibration takes place, and suddenly you go into this state of, it's enthusiasm. Suddenly there becomes like it's a totally different process. That's all I could really describe it as.
And what happens to the pain?
Well, it dissipates.
It dissipates.
It's just gone.
Now this is exactly the way it should be, but with all of the resistance that has been built up over the years through dental extractions, through root canals, through digging out old bone tissue that has corroded because of root canals, is there pain in there?
Oh my goodness me, there sure is.
And does that come back
Absolutely.
in red living lights?
Absolutely, and it's very real. I can see him, I can feel the guy there. He was a very good friend that was doing it, so I have great delight in thinking I could sink my teeth into his finger right at that moment. So there's that's quite an interesting exercise, not to use my jaw. I'm not going to tell you because he's very quick at extracting his thumb.
Anne Braid was she was doing the palate.
And we've got a ways to go yet, so that's the way it is, I think. You've just got to do it.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, the thing is, the resistance is going to be there. Part of the experience that is locked into the tissues that will be coming out with the triple axis is all of the resistance that has been locked into these dental extractions and injuries and one thing or another. And we have to learn to deal with not just the resistance, but the resistance to the resistance, which Doug has spoken to you about before. Now this we have to get to. We have to get to that point where we can satisfactorily deal with that and make sure we just let it be and you lovingly and willingly endure it. Now I will guarantee to you from past experience on these areas that you will have large bruisings that will pop out as a result of the bruisings that you have had in reverse order during the time you had the dental extractions. You will have swellings come up where you will feel totally traumatized, which will be the traumas of the tooth extractions you have had in the past. All of these things will be experienced in reverse order, and you will feel pain, you will feel trauma, you will feel resistance, you'll feel hatred, you'll feel that you have been, I don't want to use traumatized, shall I say you've been invaded? You have been invaded and corrupted by, and some of you who have lost your first tooth, you felt, I'm no longer perfect, I've lost a tooth, my body is no longer perfect anymore. And you'll feel all these sensations coming up and all this grief and all these feelings. Now, for example, one gentleman I remember in Maui, we did an STO on him. And his right leg swelled up about 3 times normal size from the thigh on down. And he thought that we had really destroyed him. When in reality, 10 days later, after the swelling began to go down, he remembered how this had happened to him as a small child, where he had hurt his leg, and his leg was all swollen up, and they had been given antibiotics to kill the pain, different drugs to kill the pain and so on. Now, the problem that we've got is the swellings and all these other things will come back in reverse order to how they have been before. If we cannot experience it on the mental level lovingly, then the universe will provide that for us and bring that swelling out until we can deal with it, which may take several days to have happen. Now you can have just a little finger there or a big finger in there, and it'll feel like the thing has totally traumatized you, when in reality this is old dental stuff that's coming out now with the anesthetic and the Novocaine, which you can taste, and all this will be coming out. Now, is it a pleasant feeling? Absolutely not. And that's why we resisted it in the first place. But please remember, no matter how careful you are on that cranial, a person's going to have all of this trauma coming out one way or the other to be re-experienced on the mental level. So please keep that in mind, because that's a question several of you had that you have posed to me on this dental trauma that is being re-experienced.
I just wanted to recount a personal experience about someone asking me to ease off a little bit. I overheard a conversation last night, two people discussing two other point holders here, and they said, so and so and so and so, never back off once on, no matter how much the person begs. No matter how much the person begs, so and so and so and so, never back off. Well, I must have some kind of compulsion to tell the truth, I guess, because one night when I was point holding, the person I was point holding on begged me to ease off a little bit. And having spent an hour and a half getting to that point, I was terribly reluctant, and I said, really, do I have to? And the person said, oh, God, yes, back off a little bit. So it was one of those rare occasions when I was really alert during point holding. So I knew. So I knew exactly how much I backed off. So I backed off maybe a quarter. Very reluctant, but I did back off a quarter. And the person said, you haven't backed off at all. And that made me realize that it was all the person's pain, and that the point holding was working, and it was producing the illusion of greater pain, or they were pulling in more pain. And my easing off hadn't helped the situation at all. So I might as well not have eased off. So I might as well be like so-and-so and so-and-so here who never back off. If I didn't have this compulsion to tell the truth, I'd follow that example. But I just wanted to tell you that experience, that I backed off, and it made no difference. They went on in absolute agony, unable to confront it, they said. But they did, in the end, confront it.
Having been in the experience of having one little tiny point on my calf muscle where the person was just touching it with the tip of their finger, I could have sworn that they were taking a knife and skewering me, you know. And I have never felt such terrible, terrible pain. And it took about 4 or 5 people that were on the table at that time telling me, John, they're just touching it with the tip of their finger. There's no pressure on it whatsoever. But it was all my pain. But it took me quite a little while before I was willing to accept that, or even trust the person to even hold my point again. And so I threw everyone off the table. I couldn't take it anymore. And I was just I think you were there, weren't you, Doug? Okay, you weren't there at the time. But I threw everybody off, and I was just red hot and mad, say, that wasn't fair. You don't do it that way. You don't just skewer me. And I couldn't. And when they told me that they weren't doing that, I had to just say, oh, you mean that was all my pain? Well, it was. So I very reluctantly got back on the table again and submitted to the completion of the point holding. That didn't stop the pain. Now, the same thing will be with the cranial work. You can just barely touch it. Now, how many of you have had the experience of just barely touching the person after letting off, keeping on contact, and the person is still in excruciating pain? You've got the idea. Now, what John has said is right on. Now, what I have done, John, when somebody tells me to back off, I back off, and then I slowly go back in again. But I don't give them relief by taking my finger out and giving them a chance for a breather, because I really sincerely believe that you're doing the person a disservice at that point by not pushing on through. Pushing, just by barely touching them, you're pushing. But you're consistently staying there until that job is completed and finished, rather than leaving them right in the middle of a healing crisis where they have all this trauma that has not been resolved. Now, you had your hand, I believe, Tana? Was your hand up? Okay, any questions on this? Comment, Doug.
From having done quite a few cranials, the thing about it is that if you take your finger out of the person's mouth every time they get uncomfortable, all you're really doing is setting up a pattern of backing off every single time the going gets tough. And the reality of it is you're not doing the person any favors whatsoever. All you're really doing is dragging the whole thing out, and you're enabling the person to drag the whole thing out and possibly never complete it. My attitude when I'm doing a triple axis on somebody is that I want to be gentle, but I want to be relentless at the same time. You can call that gently relentless or relentlessly gentle, whichever you want to phrase it, but I feel like you need to be both, gentle and relentless. And basically, if they want my finger out of their mouth, they're going to have to take it out themselves because I'm not going to do it for them.
What I would like to say is, with my experience, I've been holding points in triple axis or whatever, and it's like you're first pushing quite hard, and suddenly the person's nerve supply is restored, and it's way, way, way beyond what they can lovingly and willingly accept. And I just wanted to add that on John Sears' story, because there might be a wrong interpretation of that. At least it's the way I saw it. And that suddenly, let's say if you're pushing 10 times, you really have to back up to 3 because the nerve supply is there and they can feel the pain in a much, much more way than they could feel it before. And so I think that's quite an important thing, because I remember Doug mentioning that to us in Chambersburg, him having once a point holding that he had a point held much more than he realized until the point got restored, and then he realized that he was suppressing the pain before. I mean, maybe he could comment on that himself.
A couple things here. When you're doing say a triple axis, for example, it's quite possible. I mean, as Tarek's quite correct, it doesn't do any good to be pressing way more than the person can handle. But the thing about it is that there's another alternative besides keeping up a lot of pressure and pulling your finger out. And the other alternative is to back off in the pressure, but don't pull out. I mean, in other words, stay exactly where you are. Don't back your finger back out even one little bit, but simply just let up on the pressure a tad. You can maintain your position without and still back off on the pressure. What I experienced, which Tarek is referring to, was I was having a couple of points. My ischial tuberosities held one time, and it was really, really, really painful. I had a big guy on either side with an elbow just really, really nailing me there. And it got to the point where it was really, really, really painful. And I finally got to the point where I just had to ask him to back off. And I felt, in my own mind, I felt like I'd gotten to the point where I wasn't handling the pain anymore. So I asked them to back off. And as soon as they backed off, much to my surprise, it hurt about 10 times worse. And I realized that I'd been already suppressing the pain probably for hours at that point. So the thing is, sometimes you fool yourself into thinking that you're handling it or almost handling it, when the reality is you may have been stuffing it for hours.
Yeah, a little bit on that field. Some of you may have already worked this out, but there may be the odd one of you that hasn't. When you're laying down in particular, resisting is very much connected to relaxing. And when you're not relaxed, you're tense. And all through that session where I was laying down there, I realized that my shoulders were up again, and I'd have to relax them. And you can physically feel, as you let yourself relax, you think you're loving that pain. You're putting every ounce of what you think into it, but you're also pushing like mad, and it's locking it up. And as you let your body relax, you really don't think you're loving it anymore, but all of a sudden you realize that you are, and it's becoming that flowing past you feeling. So you can just feel that on your shoulders very clearly. And it's only a tiny movement, but I must have put my shoulders back down 100 times or more, and I never once felt myself lifting them up.
Thank you, David. Louis.
I wasn't getting my triple axis held yesterday, but kind of along the same lines, was having a lot of resistance to the pain, and I think ultimately that's what it is our resistance. And once I was able to get beyond the resistance, the pain was still there, but it didn't really matter at that point. And from Bob's perspective, who was holding the point, he immediately noticed the change. His arm had been totally numb for an hour or so, and just immediately after, and although I hadn't said a word about it, just immediately after me reaching a point where I wasn't resisting it anymore, he immediately noticed a change, and within maybe a minute or two, his whole arm came back to life, and where it had been just totally numb for an hour and a half or so. And it just ultimately, I think it's just we resist it so tremendously that we're sure that that's what the pain is, and ultimately I think it's just our resistance to that. And once we can let that go, then even if it goes on for a while, it really doesn't seem to matter. And then I think that's where the point, and with the triple axis too, once you can stop resisting it, most of the time we spend 75 or 80% of our time on the resistance to the pain, whether it's triple axis or another point. And as long as that continues, then we're just perpetuating that situation. Once we can stop resisting the calcification or the triple axis muscles, and they all just tend to ease off, and things move really quickly once we can get beyond that resistance.
Bob.
I believe that when you start to hold the points on somebody, you have made an agreement that you are there 100% with love and you want to go through the process. Now, if you're not prepared to commit yourself 100%, please don't hold my points. And I suggest you don't hold anybody else's either. Because once you start, you've got to continue and finish this process. And the pain is twofold, of course. You don't have an option sometimes. When you're holding a point firmly and the numbness and the pain and the burning come through, you are not able to move. And if you even try to ease off, the pain increases more, and it's just not a viable proposition. You must stay there. And if you allow the person to wimp out and avoid the pain, you pay the price yourself, because you will have a numb arm or a thumb and the burning for weeks sometimes. And my experience is that I like to talk to the person I'm going to hold beforehand and say, hey, are we going for this? And make an agreement that, yes, this is what we want to do. And then put your commitment 100% there, and you will find that the results will come. But by backing off, nobody wins.
Bob has made the statement that if you're not prepared to go for it 100%, don't hold his points or don't hold anybody else's. And I would say you can also go the other direction on it. If you're not, as a person on the table, prepared to go for it 100%, then don't waste anybody else's time by asking them to hold points on you. I mean, look at it both ways. If as a point holdee, you're not committed to go through the process, then please don't waste everybody else's time by asking them to hold points on you. It's not fair to the other people.
Yeah, don't be a wimp like I've been in the past. You know what I mean? We're all divinely human, but by golly, if we can laugh and realize that we just aren't up to snuff yet when it comes to handling pain, don't kick yourself. Be more committed, and just be more committed, and don't give in. Okay.
After 8 hours on my first point holding, felt part of me wanted to keep going, but part of me thought, well, I've really had enough. So I stopped on the first day, and yesterday, after about 7.5 hours, I think, I chose to stop as well. But my question is now, do I wait for the swelling and things to go down before I continue? Or will it continue with the trauma still there? And bearing in mind that we're moving on and we're going on to the next points, the pallet's the next thing. So I just wanted some clarification whether, to me to put the fingers back in there now feels a bit painful.
We've had people who are left in the middle of it. And if you can do the right side instead of the left, then about 90% of the pain will be bilateral in nature, and you'll find that that will help ease the problem on the left side as well. But remember that the trauma that is there is not from the point holding, it's from all the dental extractions and all of the stuff that we have had in there. Sometimes after a cranial that was done very, very well on me, I would be still in pain 3 weeks later because I hadn't gone through the trauma.
I understand that, and my resistance is just to the. I understand it's still the pain that's locked in there, but it's that resistance to going back on pain that I'm feeling before I start.
You might want to give it a little rest for a while and then come back in on it later. But instead of hitting the left side, go for the right side.
And my question is, in the time lapse, will this release a little bit so that when I do choose to start?
Oh, of course it will. Yeah, okay. No problem. It'll just take maybe a week or two to where you can talk normally.
And I've got to sing tonight, so bear with me. Thank you.
Okay. We've had other people where they left in the middle of their trauma, and the trauma goes on for a month or two. Okay? Rebecca. Ken Walter, are you here? Where's Ken Walter? I want Ken Walter up here. He's got something he wants to talk about.
First of all, I'd like to say that my experience with holding other people's points, Ian, is that the first thing I'd think of is how do I want a person to be with me when they're holding my points? And I try to reflect that out to the other person, because of course I can only give them what I feel myself. And one of the first things that I feel towards them is, you're in complete control. This is your body. You're the boss. And it seems to completely relax the person, and they don't have any resistance.
Until they have the pain.
They still don't have resistance to the pain, apparent so far. And John, I wanted to ask you a question, please.
Yes.
In regards to holding people's points, I'd like to actually clarify that in the personal area. When you were talking about people that are partners, are you talking about people that are intimately involved, or friends, or family, or?
Yes.
All of the above?
Yes.
But that's everybody here.
Yep, that's the way it is. We try to be as an impartial observer while we're holding a point. But if we're intimately involved, I have seen reactive mechanisms that take over where one blames the other for hurting them in one thing or another, and after a while they're into reactions, and they've lost their cool, so to speak, and their objectivity. And that's what we want to keep, is our objectivity, without getting emotionally involved and becoming sympathetic in the point holding rather than empathetic. You got the idea, Rebecca? Okay. Ken, would you share with the class what you have experienced here? I'd like everyone to share your joy with you.
Okay, about 5 years ago, I had this particular nerve right coming out of the maxilla was torn, and I had lost feeling in about this much area of my face, which also included, because I had a cut in the cheek here, it also included the loss of some muscle here. And after my triple access, I wasn't expecting anything, and I was just sort of seeing how my lips were holding together, because the muscle in this corner of my mouth didn't have any strength to it, and when I went to puff up my cheeks, it would just blow out. So I couldn't blow up balloons, or when I tried to play the didgeridoo, I had to always squeeze my lip. So the other day, I just sort of puffed my mouth up, and the air held, and it was like, wow. So I went right over to the didgeridoo, and I was able to play it, and there's still a little bit of work to be done here. There's still a little bit of numbness, but I have more and more feeling. And last night I was getting my palate held, and I could feel my nose being restructured because it as well had been smashed. And I can breathe a lot better today. And even though there was surgery and they did a whole bunch of work on my nose, after the palate holding last night, it was like, whoa, it was like there was so much more there. And even today, it's really wonderful. So I can do that now, and that makes me very happy. So thank you.
Thank you, Ken, very much. The little things that count. But those little things for us become big things. Okay, thank you, Ken. For those of you that I promised this to, is that clear? Okay, Doug, would you just please read that out loud? This is from Loretta Flora from Indiana. She's a part of a brethren group, and there's a large number of people there involved in body electronics. And this was her observation on tie-ins, where she saw the tie-ins disappear for the first time. And this is what I hope you, as part of history of body electronics, for those of you who are historians, this is very important because this was her quote in a letter to me on her observation of the tie-ins and the feelings that she was having on the pulsing at the end, which may or may not be applicable now, Doug, because things have changed so much in body electronics. But nevertheless, when you hold the tie-in until everything is complete and everything goes flat at the same time, then you let go, especially when you're holding the reflexes to the various organs of the tie-in. Go ahead, sir.
When holding tie-ins, if you continue to hold each point of the tie-in, even though it is finished, until all are finished, they will all throb simultaneously and quit at the same time.
That's how it was at one time.
It used to be that all points would throb at the end as they finished, and that really hasn't been true for probably a good 6 or 7 years now. But for many years in body electronics, that basically signified the end of the point when you got the throbbing, and then when the throbbing finished, you were done on a point. So you probably have to amend this a bit and basically say, hold all of the points in the tie-in until they're all finished, where basically until they've all gone flat, which may or may not mean throbbing at the end, but just hold them all till they all go flat.
Now, Doug will remember about 1988 that the points that were throbbing finally started getting the electricity coming through. And so the electricity started coming through about 1988 and has been increasingly more powerful ever since. And so we have found that the greatest amount of internal healing takes place when you feel that electricity coming out of a point. And this is when you have real regeneration taking place in the muscles and the nervous system and so on. Anything you want to say, sir?
Well, just that for most of the people here, they've started point holding since that time anyway, so they're not really even used to that. But we find that, occasionally you get an old timer who turns up in a seminar, somebody that maybe hasn't held points for 10 years, and they really expect things to be a certain way. In other words, they expect the point to get hot and numb for a while and then eventually pulse and finish out, because that's how it always was. And it's always kind of fun to have somebody like that come back to point holding, because they get very, very confused because they can't figure out what's going on, because the point will pulse first and then get hot or get numb and then pulse again and then get electricity and just kind of go all over the place, and they don't really quite know what's going on there.
I'd be interested if anyone here experienced the pulsing on the triple axis. Yeah, it's definitely on.
But you're asking how many people experience pulsing on their index finger as they held the triple axis. How many of you experienced the pulsing simultaneously on all three surfaces of the finger? Simultaneous but separate pulsing on all three surfaces. About 6 or 8 of you.
Yeah, coming back to the question of the pressure you give somebody with the triple axis. My first experience here with Tom Stazers,